Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nels Bangerter, and I'm a documentary film editor, most recently on Dick Johnson is Dead. I'm really excited to be here today on behalf of Neon and Final Cut for Real for a special conversation where we take a peek behind the cut of a truly remarkable film, the animated documentary Flea. Our special guest today is a prolific editor with decades of incredible work. Alongside Flea, he's known for his work on the 2017 Netflix documentary Strong Island, directed by Yancey Ford, the 2012 documentary The Act of Killing, directed by Joshua Oppenheimer, and 2021's Best International Feature Film Oscar winner Another Round, as well as The Hunt, both directed by Thomas Vinterberg. He also received a 2022 Annie Award nomination for his work editing Flea. I should add also that it's a personal honor for me to welcome editor Janus Billeskov Jansen.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for our conversation. Thank you.
Now, before we get started, I'd love to give the audience a quick summary of our main focus today, the film Flea. Let's play the trailer.
Prøv en lille smule længere op. Meget lidt. Så hvis du ligesom lukker øjnene nu, og prøver at trække vejret sådan dybt ind. Hvad betyder ordet hjem for dig?
Hjem er noget, som er trygt.
Kaboul, les attaques des Moudjahidines repris.
Har du nogensinde fortalt din livshistorie før?
Nej. Vi skal ud. Det er nu. Lidt dårligt samvittighed, at min bror han bliver tilbage. Vi flygtede med menneskesmuglerne. Det værste mennesker i mit liv.
Har du fortalt Kasper nogle af de her historier overhovedet?
Nej. Det tager tid at stå det på folk. Det går rundt og tænke tilbage. Så det er min fortid, og det jeg kan ikke flygte fra det, og jeg har heller ikke lyst. Jeg kan mærke, at der skal ske noget. Her starter jo min historie.
Directed by Janus Rasmussen and executive produced by Riz Ahmed and Nikolai Coster-Waldau, Flea is an animated documentary that portrays the true story of a man's need to confront his past in order to truly have a future. Flea is an animated film that visualizes a series of ongoing conversations between the director, Janus, and his longtime friend, Amin. The film follows Amin's journey and challenges as a young gay refugee fleeing Afghanistan for Russia before fleeing again to Denmark. Most notably, the film uses really beautiful animation in a number of powerful ways, including to conceal Amin's true identity. Now, let's get started with a few questions. Janus, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the film?
Well, I met Janus, the director, many years ago when he actually was a student, and I came in and out of his student editing room and gave him, advices. And then later on, when he, became a more consolidated documentaryist, I came in and out of his editing room there occasionally, and just, that's something that we do very much in Denmark, that we go in and out of each other's editing room and giving good advices and listening and helping out. And I think that's something which is very special for Denmark, and something that a lot of people around the world really could learn about, that open up the editing room. The animation was for two purposes: to keep the main character Amin in the distance so that he could feel free and really talk open and at the same time open up the past, because it's Kabul that we start out, where he's fleeing from, where he's grew up with his family. And it's difficult to find, really go in and find shoots from and tell this story from actual footage now. So that could be really feel the personal identity of him and getting closer and closer into understanding of Amin, and to get him the freedom to speak. And then a year later, then he came back and said that, as I said, there was going to be a documentary. And then he has put up a guideline for what kind of story that it should be, where it should start, and which different parts that he wanted to animate as in order to catch the understanding of which circumstances that he was living with his family, and the way that he was fleeing, and and all of these scenes that we have animated with the human trafficker and catch in the boat, and the difficulties there, having the boat coming close to sinking. All of these are, built from very strong stories from Amin, the way that he talked, and of course in the editing you condense the stuff and see that we want to go more in that direction and that understanding. The actually opening in the film will home. What is home was from Januss, the director, right away. And that was very, very interesting. It sets the style of the film. It sets the idea of what is we really dealing with here. What is the topic of the film? And he also, at that time, had the idea of these three different kinds of cinematographically storytelling parts that we had. One is the Foley 2D full color animation, and the other was this more black and white dramatic part. And then for the last part, it was the archive material. We didn't necessarily have all the archive material when we started out really into editing, but we gathered a lot throughout the editing. So you could say that the documentary style and the original version is his original sound. It is his original voice. It is his tone of voice. It's his way of telling the story. It's his, and all of it is catched on the couch, as we see in the beginning.
So the interview elements were also filmed. Is that right? That the interactions between Januss and Amin?
Basically, you can say, yeah. Okay. I would say 90% of it was, but of course, at the same time, as the editing and understanding of the story developed, we also got to know him better and better. And we also got to know our storytelling better and better, and also what is actually needed for the story, for the audience to understand. So we had Januss going back to Amin and go deeper into questioning. Some of it was still filmed on the couch, and some was just audio, because we knew that we were still in the animation project there, so we knew that was the way.
Og det regner, og det stormer.
Det skal vi bare blive ved med at gøre, fordi der kommer vand hele tiden. Den her båd har ikke engang en radiotransmitter. Så vi kan ikke engang ringe efter hjælp. Og ingen kan svømme. Jeg tror, det ville have været nemmere, hvis jeg var alene, men min mor, hun er jo sindssygt bange. Hun altid, når hun snakkede om død, så snakkede hun altid med om det med altså, dø i vand eller blive druknet. Det var hendes værste mareridt.
Hvad tænker du der?
Jeg tænker på, hvem skal man ride fast, hvis den her båd går ned?
Fordi du kunne godt svømme.
Nej. Jeg tror, det var ikke smart, det at tænke på. Eller jeg troede, jeg kunne svømme. Eller... Jeg ved ikke, jeg var ikke sådan... Jeg var mest bekymret, hvem jeg skulle vælge.
Janus, when we talked before, we talked a little bit about one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Takes place on the boat. Can you tell us a little bit more about that scene?
It's told in this scary, traumatic nightmare way of black and white, and we're getting underneath the water we see up there, and all that this kid is actually thinking about is not himself, but actually who and how am I going to save, even though that I cannot swim. Doesn't really come to his mind. It's just by talking to Januss that suddenly come to the grown-up as it, but the way that he tells that he is the way that he talks about that, how it was as a child, is very, very strong to me. And once again, I think it's a moment where the animation and the true story and his actual voice and that kind of documentary, that those two things meet each other and create something unique and emotional, very strong moment, not just for me, but also I'm absolutely sure for the audience. That's these three, that is these 2D fully color animated part that goes into the black and white and then back again into the to the present time, because it's also him lying on the couch telling the story. So it's actually moving around there in many times and rooms there, and yeah, that's interesting to me.
Great example of where editing really beautifully can combine these things in a way that make them work. There's no way you could have seen how to do that beforehand.
And the rhythm, the rhythm in the voice, and the rhythm in the Jess and Kenneth's animation, 2D fully animated, and then also the documentary and his. It becomes very, very honest. I mean, that is really a moment where you feel that this is an honest story and this is honest what he is telling, and that get the audience very close to our main character here. Amen.
Yeah, the talking head setup for a documentary interview is often, I think, sort of people don't recognize its value, I think. And I think in this film, even though it's animated, we're not even seeing the actual footage of the talking head. I feel like those scenes have this tremendous energy of their own. I think that's really one of the brilliant parts of how this film works in the edit. But before we get further into it, I want to ask you, when you're starting out with a new collaborator, director, what do you do to sort of create the relationship between the two of you, with you and Januss early on?
One thing, important thing throughout the later part of my life as an editor, is that I have really loved working with the young people, young and I don't know if it's fair of me to say less experienced people, because it's I, as you know, the old storyteller professor, or how you would put it, meeting the young, energetic, violent, you know, full of story, and we have to do it in a new way. And so that the way that collapses is a fascinating, really fascinating, and I have to say it's still at the same time it keeps me alive. You know, I think that the most important thing that I can do as an editor for a director is to have his or her idea come through to the audience. And what kind of strong storytelling line do you want? And then helping that out with all the, you know, experience and knowledge that I have, and also question it, and thereby question myself. And in that dialogue comes up totally new idea that the director, she couldn't come up with it by herself, and I, as an editor, could not come up with it by myself. So that collaboration is a fantastic thing. So a lot of my directors is actually sitting next to me. We did a Strong Island a couple of years ago, and Januss was just sitting there from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening, day after day, you know, 6 months, eight months, I think. And that's fantastic. And in that, you become personal, because you're actually closer to each other than you can with your wife, maybe. But it's something very special. I always thought, you know, that editing room is a very, very private room. I always have a sign which goes like this: is the old scissor, saying that whatever is said in here will never go out of this room. We're sitting in my editing room at the moment, here at the old Danish film studio, but what is said in here is, so talking to you, even though I know there's a lot of people watching, it's still, you know, an editor to an editor, and there's something which is personal and secure room for here. Everything is supposed to be said and can be said, and well, did it answer your question?
No, it does. I mean, I think you've hit upon something that's kind of interesting in the dynamic between the editor and the director, and to have some inversions there, an experienced editor working with a less experienced director, but the director's the one with the vision and the editor's the one who's in some ways executing it. I think having that mixed up and not just a top-down relationship brings something, at least in a lot of the films you've worked on, to the process. But that actually leads into my next question, which is, when you were starting out as an editor, how did you even come to editing in the first place?
When I was 16, I started out fooling around with the old 16 millimeter Bolex camera, you know, the one that you rewind and then it can run for 90 seconds. And so I started fooling around with that. And then in the age of 18, I just totally out of faith, it ended up in an editing room with a very experienced and generous, fantastic film editor. And I didn't know anything about editing, but suddenly I was, you know, it was a revelation to me when that young, I left school, I didn't want to do anything else. It was February the 5th, 1970, I entered the editing room. And now today, 52 years later, I haven't, you know, left it since. So it was the fantastic way of getting into the storytelling, you know, really getting into the analyzing of what a storytelling is, and also get to use your whole full personality in understanding the different characters that we were dealing with, and you know, make them come across to the audience. One thing that I've always thought about, and I think that I learned from the very first time in the editing room with my tutor there, was that we seek the true moment And I think it's something that you need to practice and practice again and again and again in order to find, that of all the footage that you have, that little piece there, despite of all the bad things there, that little window there, that, 20 seconds or something, holds something unique of this particular character that we are talking about, that we are looking at or talking about. And what I really like about this is that when people sometimes come back to you after screening and says, what was this character actually, what was on her mind there? And I say, well, what do you think? Well, I think this and that. And I say, well, that's fine to me. That goes well. But and then they will ask me again, but what was he thinking? And I say, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But that was a very fantastic moment where I see into her eyes and into the soul behind. But I'm not the one in storytelling telling you exactly what you are going to feel or think.
That actually reminds me of one of my favorite scenes in the film, if I can bring it up right now, which is it's a sequence in a sense that begins with an interview scene between Januss and Amin, and there's an excision in the interview, a jump cut that I think kind of indicates that something is being both left out and explicitly left out, that there's an honesty about what's being cut out. Then it goes into a section that is about how intense the stakes of the story, in a way that if Amin's true story comes out, he may lose his immigration status on some level. And then this is where it really gets interesting and subtle. It cuts to a scene with Amin and his partner Casper looking for a house in the country. And the third part of the scene is so subtle and so kind of ineffable. I was wondering what you were thinking about when you put that sequence together.
I think there's two things. I really like that you say that it's honest, because I really feel that Flea is an honest film. It's honest to Amin's character and to his real life. And it also honest in the way that we tell story in documentaries. We do have to compress parts, because there could be a long discussion and interaction. In the real life, it was take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. In a cut down, it will take 7 minutes, and in the final version of the film, it will be 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes or something like that. So that concentration there, but the honesty there is that you actually let the audience know that you have made cuts and there's something that, as you said, is left out. And that is what I would call, out of continuity cut, that you say that you have the person sitting like this and then sitting like this later on, and it will still have this, the audio will continue in a more emotional flow, but you will at the same time have shown. And we wanted to do that even though that is animated, to keep that documentary style into it.
Because animation would have allowed you to smooth that over completely. You could have completely hidden that cut.
Yeah, I could have done that. Definitely, I could have done that. The interesting thing here, people is so much talking about Flea as an animated documentary. And I like, to be provocative and say it's actually the opposite. It's the other way around. That actually it is a documentary, which is animated. Mm-hmm. Because the documentary part is really the essence of the film. And then the cinematographically storytelling and doing it in as an animated is on top of that. But the way that we have been searching for the truth, for the getting behind the understanding of Amin's character, both Amin's character as a child, but also Amin's character as a grown-up, actually lying there on the couch, telling his story about his young, fleeing and with his family, and then what does it actually do to him? So yes, we really wanted to stick to the honesty in understanding in the documentary. It actually comes up more than once in the film.
There's a subtlety also in the last part of that, again, where Amin is petting the cat. And this is a moment, I think, like the one that you just cited, this is a moment where you could say, what's he thinking in that moment? Or you know, I don't think the audience explicitly knows what's going on in that scene, but it's a very sensitive one and it reveals him deeply.
Right. And that's, it's filmed in real life. And we have taken away the actual images and put animation on top of that instead of, maybe not exactly one-to-one like that, but the way that you could hear the voice of the fiancé, the Casper, in the background talking about what kind of berries or whatever trees it is there, and he, you know, really doesn't really want to pay attention to it, and just heading, you know, like a abstraction to the cat on the ground and trying to stay out. That lines there is just totally the flow of what the original scene was. A very interesting thing is that it was a scene that was close to end up dead on the editing room floor, because that we thought, you know, oh, but does it really? But what does it do here? You know, is it really funny? But then after one of the first preview, not preview, but first screenings that we had, you know, for a bigger audience, found that people actually understood what was going on there. Just as you said, you know, that's something interaction or non-interaction between Amin and his fiancée there that comes across and make people in the audience, you know, giggling and getting people to laugh and giggle in an audience is some of the most difficult thing in the world, and something like that you never want to cut out. Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think documentaries often can veer too far into the informational mode, I think. And what you've brought to this film really beautifully are those moments as well of emotional moments. And that maybe the animation allows this in a way that's unusual. But can you talk a little bit about how your experience with editing fiction, which is really extensive, and how do you bring the two together, fiction and documentary?
There's two different kinds, you know. When you have a fiction film, you have the actual script here, you know, that you know the beginning and you know the ending, or at least, you know, they have a bigger understanding of what kind of direction that story takes, and you have the characters, and so you have a layout of what kind of storytelling that you're dealing with here. With the characters in the fiction film, you can do with them whatever you want. I mean, in the end, we have a film here, we can, you know, we are dealing with it right here on the screen. We can, you know, have her drown in the end, or we can have her, you know, decide and come to the surface and actually survive. It's pretty much that. But in the documentary, you have huge ethic and moral question to answer, because in the end of the day, you are in a situation where you are, that these characters that you're dealing with and portraying in the film and following in the film, that you, in the end of the day, have them to feel that this was a true part of their life, and that you can actually look them into their eyes, and they look into your eyes and they nod and say that you cannot just do anything with them. I mean, you really have to get very close into their personality in order to feel that you have been honest to them and to their story. A lot of the time in a documentary, 90% of the time you're actually searching for the ending of the film, you know, the conclusion, what is actually the where did all of this lead to? It's not so that in Flea, we had the ending saying that we know that he was going to move in together with his fiancée, and that was a decision. We needed him to, as a grown-up, to capture what has happened to him during the Flea, what has actually done to his life, the way that he pursued people, not distrusting people, not really being afraid of getting engaged and things like that. So we needed him to talk about that. It was a good thing as well, because you can say that the Flea is working on two different kinds of storytelling coming parallel at the same time, which is actually, you know, they have the grown-up man lying at the couch talking about his childhood and his teen when he's fleeing together with his family from Afghanistan to, but then at the same time, talking about it, get the grown-up a new knowledge, saying something that has been hidden, and he hasn't really ever really told to his fiancée that. Yet, that being told and analyzed in his old head, you do something with the grown-up. He needs, you know, to take this new steps in life by understanding of what has actually happened in his childhood and what that did to him.
I want to talk a little bit about a really beautiful visual element, which is the archival film snippets that come in. This is an animated film, but there are these live action moments that appear, and the way that they connect with and sort of emphasize the veracity of what happened, you know, this is connection to this is real, this is actual, and the way that they sort of play as dream sequences. Can you talk a little bit about how you use that material?
I think that if we talk about Afghanistan and when he was a child there, getting into the 2D fully color-graded color animation of him is getting close into him, an understanding of him. And then as a boy, it's also a way of telling you, it's a music, it's an opening, and you're getting in there. But using the archive photos there, I think was very important for us, because it also told the audience or me something about Afghanistan at that time, because it's not the Afghanistan and Kabul that we know from today, not even from the 2020 or 2019. It would be, you know, women closed. Or here we have, you know, schoolgirls. We have you see movies. You see all of these things that would be, you know, totally impossible today. So it was important for us, you know, to say that Afghanistan, where he grew up, was different. The archive photos really proved that and set it into perspective that but it looks like this, and you later on see it in the animation together with Amin. It's we have proof that this is actually true. It's a true and honest story. It's an interesting thing. You know, when we start editing, Januss as a director has been out searching for going back to Moscow and finding the places there where he was actually living with his parents, or not his parents, but his mother and brother and sisters there. And he also went to Estonia, where he went to Estonia where they, you know, they were in a kind of prison there, the whole family there, and he found that a special place. And in the editing, by talking to Amin, he started talking about that actually there was a film crew there while he was there. And actually, he think that it was finished. And then we start digging into the archive and searching for archive in Finnish television, and actually found out that they actually had been there. So that was something that came on in the editing process, and because we get closer into Amin, and suddenly we could prove, that it was not there. And we showed those pictures to Amin, and he could pick out, that was a woman with the boy with the blinking shoe, and that was his nephew there, and that was something very interesting that actually happened during the editing.
With, as you said, 50 years of experience in the editing room, I know you've accumulated a lot of wisdom, but I think editing is a really hard thing to talk about. Is there a way that you talk about editing that kind of brings best to life what happens? If
we're talking about feature film and documentary, I think both of it goes for finding the most true moments in the story, and to pass it on to the audience. My understanding of storytelling is that it goes way, way, way back. It goes thousands, 2,000, 5,000 years back from the way that we have, created story in order to tell stories that give us understanding of life. So I think it's something that we brought up with, and I think it's something that you should search for in yourself and have a clear understanding. If you're going for being an editor, you have to make decisions. I'm going to show you this and not this. I'm going to show this first and this afterwards. And you have to make decisions all the time. If you're afraid of making decisions, you can never ever be a storyteller or because if you don't really dare to make the cut, because what you have to do is that you make the cut, you see how it works, and then again you think, does that really tell what I do? You are questioning yourself and doubting yourself, but what I used to say, in a positive way, because you have to question it all the time. Oh, could it be better? Could it be better? Could it be like this? Could it be like this? But now I do it like this. Okay, now I do it like this. Now I do it like this. So that's so much on my back. It's like a chess play that you actually have an idea about 5 or 6 cut ahead. And when you plan that, then you can feel free, because when you actually are putting 2 images together, one person is looking on another person in a cut, then something miracle is happening, something that you couldn't really think of before that you actually make the cut. So you ruin what you have planned, but you have your plan in your head at the same time, and therefore you're on top of the story. It is not so that the actual images, is running away with you, and you don't know what you're doing. So this back and forth is something I think is rely on it.
So much of your work is really, really interesting because it's breaking with the usual form of a film. Like you said, you're not steeped in the 3-act storytelling structure and those sort of crutches of typical thinking about how a film works. What if you're looking in a way to be at least open to breaking new ground, what do you look at? What do you bring to the edit besides an open mind?
I'm both the storyteller, holding all my tools in the hand, and I'm the first-time viewer. And I'm swifting back and forth between that all the time. It's not about seconds, it's milliseconds that this makes me cry. This I can feel it. This doesn't make me cry because I wanted the audience to cry here. Then as a storyteller go in and think, oh, what is wrong? What is wrong? What can I as a storyteller change? One thing I think you really have to have patience, that you really like, to go into this dark editing room and just stay here for hours and hours and hours, and not really wanted to get out of here because you're so deep into this storytelling. That if you're impatient, and then it's too difficult, because editing takes time, takes a lot of time. And me myself, I'm a very, very slow editor. I try to go into every scene, even though that it's a documentary or feature film, and actually cut it as close as possible that I can do, as if this was a way that I would like to see it in the final film. And my experience is that 50% of the scenes that you edit, actually end up in the very first cut, but you have used days of that very first cut, because either it works or it doesn't work. Making very fast, short, long samples there, it doesn't mean anything to me, because either the character or the storytelling is there or not. So that's one thing. People is coming to you and say, well, how can you be working, months after months and months after this on the same story? And they will say, don't you get bored? Don't you get tired in this? And how can you ever see it with fresh eyes? And that's something which is very important to me, is that you have to make the decision that you can always see the scenes in the film that you're doing with fresh eyes, even though that you're coming in the morning and get out in the evening and come in next morning, you never ever get dry. Because if you let yourself think that now I cannot look at this anymore because I'm all too fed up with it or something like that, then you're lost, and then you could get out of the editing room. It's simply a decision that you have to make, that I'm always on top of the story. And then something that I really like, and that I learned from an American assistant that I had at this time, was serendipity. Serendipity, where something suddenly happens and you think, oh, I never really thought that it should go in that direction, or I made a cut that I actually didn't really meant to make that cut, but suddenly it makes something. And I think that's not just that serendipity is something that you just stumble over and it's there. I also think it's a special gift or a capacity to be open for serendipity, that it actually really can happen to you, and be open and think that, oh my goodness, I could be overwhelmed by the film, and it can take me in a new direction. That's very interesting for me.
So Januss, you haven't edited animation before, if I'm correct. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and I guess triumphs of working in that mode?
So you had to understand that when we were working with Flea, we had to deliver an animatic which was in exact length within the budget. And we were dealing with 3 different kinds of budget. We were dealing with the budget for the 2D full color animated that was cost so this amount. And we were dealing another budget for what we had for the more black and white, more dramatic part of it. And then for the budget for the archive material. That has to end up. So, every cut, every time that we were staying at a close-up of Amin, every time that we have him in a sequence on the sea, for instance, where the boat is sinking and they are all afraid, every cut had to be exact on frame. And we were just looking, on these very, I wouldn't say poor, but simple black and white animation, which was a little here, a little there. You can open the eyes, you can close the mouth, and deal with it like that. And then you can ask for a wider shot, you can ask for a closer shot, and you can discuss whether we should cut some part of it out here already now. And yes, and Kenneth, as an animator, was next to me in the next room for a month or two, and could send back and forth what I requested and what the common ideas that they came up with. But you had to be exact on second as long as the film could be, because of budget. And then they went into all this animation, and it took them maybe a year or something like that. We looked at it and how it was developed and things like that. That was very interesting. Going back to the actual black and white, very simple storytelling there. And we showed it for test audience, and they got moved and they were emotionally involved in it. And that was that was fantastic. That really to understand that this story, had that potential. But at the same time, when that happened, I got scared, because if simple black and white can do something that extraordinary with an audience, oh my goodness, will it all disappear if suddenly the actual animation in 2D full color, and that we really can see the face of a man, that really see how the surroundings in the animation, how it is, will it suddenly disappear, and that magic, will that disappear? But well, hope it didn't, and I was really happy, and I really think that it's something fantastic what Kenneth and Jess did there in order to bring it up to a totally different level. And I think that's the beauty of Flea, is that it's a documentary, the voice, the tone in his voice, and actually the not really real life, because it's animated, that when those two meet each other and merge, something completely new reveal itself. And I can point out this one particular scene is that in the end, when close to the end, when Amin is taken by his big brother to this bar, and we as an audience is a little afraid of what is actually going to happen here. Is it going to take him to a prostitute, because he said he's never been with a girl, and haven't really told him yet, that he actually was to men, and that it's told in animation and in actors' voices. But then when he actually gets into the room and is accepted by the big brother, said that, oh, we all knew that you were two men, and that is a big reveal. And getting into the room, and that fantastic moment that Jess and Kenneth made there, of full of life and Amin's life suddenly, could being open for something completely different here. And then you at the same time hear his actual voice, the way that his voice is trembling, the way that he is a little ashamed, and at the same time that he is giggling and saying, well, this was the very first time I was on a gay bar, and he can hardly say it. And then he says, I didn't come home that night. And he's laughing. And that moment with those two things, merge and is a brilliant and fantastic moment to me. So when documentary and this animation made, and that would be totally impossible to create if it wasn't. I think that the animation really, brings it to life in a completely different understanding, and takes the audience to deeply emotional. I cry there every time. I must admit, it's a very strong moment for me.
Yeah, I think we as editors work really hard to create these moments, and then, as you're saying, remaining open to when they're really working to something that can surprise us is the other half of our role. I'll end this with one more question. What's next for you?
So lately I've done two things. That I have worked almost a whole year on a documentary with a young American director about the killing of a young journalist, and it's a true story of a young journalist that was gunned down, investigating journalist that was gunned down together with his fiancée, and what it did to the society. It was Slovakia in 3 years ago or something like that. That is a very interesting thing. But then again, that what we're working on here now is together with one Danish director, Bille August, that I actually started out to work together with on his first film in 1977.
That looks like that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to Neon, Final Cut for Real, and Impact24 PR for putting this together. And a special thanks, of course, to our featured guest, Januss, for all your insight. For everyone out there, please see Flea and spread the word on this important and wonderful film. I hope you have a nice rest of your day or evening.